So recent rumors are pointing at a potential 5080 Super coming out, and maybe the best feature of it would be 24 gigabytes of VRAM, pretty much putting it like on par with the 4090, at least in terms of the VRAM. Now, it's going to have a much more narrow memory bus, 256 bits, but it's interesting, but is it kind of useless and pointless? I don't think anybody right now is like, oh, the 5080, 16 gigabytes of VRAM, that's no good. People complain about 8 and 12 gigabyte GPUs. Sure, 16 gigabytes in some cases is also getting a little bit long in the tooth. But people are a lot more worried about pricing and like availability because the pricing of GPUs absolutely ridiculous. Like the 5090, like you go into a store like Micro Center and it's $3,000 basically for like the cheapest model, give or take. And now let's hear a word from our sponsor, VIP-CDKdeals.com, a Windows Pro CD key. Add to cart, you put in code CC20. This will also work on Windows 11. You want to go into your settings in Windows, change and adjust your CD key, click activate, and now let's go back to the video. It's like we're in a different universe. I don't even know how to describe it really. A few years ago, even the 3090 seemed really expensive at $1,600, and it's doubled that. It's pretty crazy. And then you go to the 5080 and then the eventual 5080 Super. I mean, the 5080 was supposed to be $999, right? But realistically, it's more like $1,800 in some cases, like the Asus Astro. $1,799 is what that's up to. I don't care how cool that GPU looks, and it does look cool. It's a great GPU. It's really worth almost $1,000 more than like the base 5080. I don't really think so. I mean, you're getting maybe a little bit better build quality and aesthetics, maybe a little better performance. That's worth maybe what, $200, maybe $300 if you really want to stretch it, but not really 800. Obviously, it's not just Asus overcharging for that particular GPU. It's more, all of the other factors that are surrounding the current market and the current sort of space that we're in right now with pricing and tariffs and everything that's going on. Okay, but we can talk about bad pricing, forever, and never mind the other GPUs in the lineup, like the 5060. That was a whole debacle recently. It's always fun testing all the different GPUs and like trying them out, even the 5060, which is, obviously not a 5090. But pricing and, the performance gains that you're getting, that makes it a whole different conversation. So let's go back to the 5080 Super. Now, if the 5080 is already, nearing $1,800, you can bet that, like, let's say on paper, the MSRP of a 5080 Super, I think the reason NVIDIA would release a 5080 Super, now see if you can follow along, so they can raise the price because they can justify it in a million ways, not only with the stuff that's going on worldwide, but with the actual GPU. If it has 24 gigabytes of VRAM, $1,599. Oh, that seems like we just cracked the code, huh? If they give it 24 gigabytes of VRAM, people can't complain about it not being $1,599, at least in NVIDIA's theory. That's at least my speculation, right? Because the 4090 was $1,599, so you're getting a bargain. But is it even going to be faster than the 4090? I mean, the 5080 still gets beat pretty handedly by the 4090. And even when VRAM's not an issue, the 5080 is not something that's getting close to the 4090 in a lot of games. So the 5080 Super maybe might match it, like at best, 24 gigabytes of VRAM, and then they can price it for $1,599. Did we just figure out that, the plan? You know why I say that? They actually did this before with the same stupid little VRAM bump. Remember the 3080? That came out at $699 with 10 gigabytes of VRAM, which for the time a few years ago was like the bare minimum acceptable for like a high-end GPU. Obviously, you wanted 12 or 16 at the time, but 10, whatever. NVIDIA kind of, heard, some complaints. And then the 3080 was kind of like re-released, if you will, an updated version with 12 gigabytes of VRAM. But that's not the only thing that was updated. It also went up in price to like, $1,200 on average, $1,250. They didn't have a Founders Edition, so NVIDIA didn't have to slap an official MSRP and look bad in the media. they can just pass it along to like all the third-party AIB partners, like at the time EVGA and things like that. And then that GPU was, basically not double the price of the 3080, but that's what happened. And NVIDIA's probably going to do the same playbook again. You have the cheap, the 5080 at $999 on paper. It's not really like that in the real world. But then on paper, they can release the 5080 Super with 24 gigabytes of VRAM, and that way it's going to be more justifiable. That, it seems like it's what they're doing. It's the way they justify these GPU increases. But remember, with the pricing going up, there are other things that are going up as well with like the 5080 Super. The other tidbit of information that we heard, potentially, like the power draw is going to be, over 400 watts, probably getting closer, to the 4090. You're going to need a more powerful power supply like this one. This is the Be Quiet Pure Power 12M. Now, 1200 watts is something that a few years ago was like the very high end of builds would have it, right? Like with like dual Titan GPUs or something like that, or, like something for like the record books, basically. But now it seems like with the GPUs like the 5090 and even the 5080 Super, if that gets close to a 4090, you're going to need something a lot beefier. So that's, adds to the cost, and then it's going to add, obviously it's nice to have more overhead. That's why you want something that's like more like this. But then your requirements go up. And also something else, you don't hear about as many issues with like, GPUs like the 4070, for example, because that one doesn't draw that much power. Even the 4080 Super and the 4080, which they range in, in the 300s in terms of watts, 320 to 350, those never really had too many problems. You heard about some burnt connectors and things like that, but the 4090, you heard about a lot of problems. Even if it was like 0.001% or whatever it was, you heard about a lot of problems. And because it's, a lot of power, 450 watts. There've also been some, small reports of 5090s, but the thing is like pulling almost 600 watts. That's a lot of power. This cable here, look at that, it says 600 watts on it. This is going to be pretty much the standard of cables that are, NVIDIA has been using for the last few years. And if you can see on the power supply itself, you have a, very specific connector here that also says 600 watts, and that's where you're going to put this cable. Now, if you don't have a power supply with this cable, obviously the GPU comes in the box with the adapter, but you're going to have, like sometimes like 4 8-pins to one, to be able to connect it. So you got to connect 4 different PCIe 8 pins, so that way it can go into one, piece like the GPU. You need that's like a lot of unsightly cables. And, a lot of cables are a big problem because a lot of these GPUs are already massive. So more cables means that your case is going to be cramped. Sometimes it may not close with the glass, especially with the 4090. Like, even though I never had a problem with it, and you hear reports of it, it's always in the back of your mind, right? Like, even when I would like maybe take it out for whatever reason, I would check the connector and be like, oh, did something look burnt? It's just a little bit of like, it's an expensive GPU. Imagine that with the 5090. That's pretty nasty. Like, if that GPU breaks and you paid over $3,000 for it, that's going to sting. You would have thought at one point NVIDIA would have figured out how to, especially using DLSS that they like to push so much, how to maybe at least make the GPUs have less power and even more performance. I don't know. I guess that's just not a bridge that they've crossed. Even though, don't get me wrong, like the 40 series, in many ways, they're efficient in a lot of ways. Even, the 4090 in a sense, even though that came, 450 watts was a lot. And the 5090 at 575 watt TDP is even more. They still have some weird efficiencies about them. Like they don't always use that much power. They do use it intelligently. So that, we can't really go just saying that NVIDIA is just using the power. I mean, the TDP is there, that's high, and sometimes it does reach pretty high. But they are, in general, efficient GPUs. I even remember it was funny how Some AMD GPUs are, oh no, they're also very efficient in a lot of cases, and they were known to be efficient until, as NVIDIA started going with the 30 series and 40 series, all of a sudden, a lot of NVIDIA GPUs were a lot more efficient. Like the performance you get per the watt really improved. So that's a battle that AMD and NVIDIA, they're always sort of figuring out as well, because it's one thing to have the most performance. It's another thing to be able to do it in a way that the power draw isn't too insane. The value of it isn't important, the pricing and availability. That's why we always talk about this. So I think that the 5080 Super is really just a reason for NVIDIA to raise prices. That's really just like with the 3080 to the 3080 12 gigabyte. I think that's what NVIDIA is planning to do. So that's why I'm not too excited about a 5080 Super. And it's going to be really expensive. It's hard to find stuff. It's going to be in between the 5080 and the 5090. And there's a lot of in-between space there because the 5090s are getting close to like $3,500 or almost $4,000 probably pretty soon. So I don't know. Future of GPUs definitely weird. So let's see what happens. All right, guys. So remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.